everybody, it's Jace from BlackOvis. This is a video I've been super excited about making for a while now. So with the ever-growing popularity of TAC, we're seeing a lot more builds that are specific for TAC or potential like longer range type shooting that we see out west here. And a lot of people are confused, or maybe they go to TAC, it's their first event, and they get their lunch ate because they are just not set up for a TAC event where 100+ yard shots are common. I've seen them out to 140 here at the Utah event before. So it takes a pretty specific setup for that. You know, arrows are expensive, your time's expensive, and going to those events, they're not a cheap event either. So I just want to kind of give you an idea what it takes to be successful and, you know, put the stepping stones in place so that you're going to go and have the most fun at that event as possible. So I want to talk sights for a minute. So right here next to me, I have one of my bows for the year. This is a prime form, but mainly I want to focus on the sight setup. There's a couple things that are going to, you know, give you a flatter trajectory or a tighter pin gap. One of those is going to be the pin to peep distance when you're at full draw. The shorter you can make that, the flatter and the tighter your pin gaps are going to be. So, you know, choosing a sight that isn't mounted clear out here, you know, you'll see a lot of guys that are running a dovetail type sight, and they have it extended way out here, and it could be for a lot of reasons, or maybe they're just uneducated and, you know, their buddy told them to do it that way. But the tighter you can run that sight to your bow, it's going to help flatten that trajectory and get you a lot more clearance at yardage. So this happens to be the new HHA here. The distance from where it mounts here on the pick mount to the pin is quite short compared to a lot of others out there. The Spot Hog Boonie is going to be a good one. The new Excel driver is going to also be a good one. And then there's a few sights that have the dovetail that allow you to slide them in as far as possible, and that's going to give you a lot more clearance than, you know, say something that's clear out here. And, you know, you're going to run into clearance issues probably even less than 100 yards in some cases, depending on your pin configuration. Speaking of pin configuration, that's another important one. So a lot of folks want to run a single pin. The problem with a single pin is you're using the center of the housing as a reference, and, you know, you have a lot of negative space that isn't being used up inside of that. I'm going to do kind of a quick, you know, little drawing on a whiteboard to show you what I'm talking about there. But multiple pins are going to help you clear farther yardage. Or if you do like that sight picture that you get from a single pin, I would recommend running a double pin so you do have another reference point that's lower in the housing, and I'll show you that when I go over the whiteboard. All right, so arrows, this is kind of the primary focus of this video is arrows. Obviously, we have our Arrow ID, arrow configurator online. You can build any of these arrows you see here on our Arrow ID, excluding this target shaft, but we do carry the hunting version of this shaft. We'll talk more about that in a second. We also carry obviously all the components. So if you're a DIY guy and you like to build arrows like myself, we are going to carry these shafts. You can buy them, do it all yourself as well. But Vane configuration is going to be a huge part of this. So these are some of my personal arrows right here in front of me, and I'm not opposed to 3-fletch, but I am running a 4-fletch on these for a reason. So when you're running a 4-fletch out of your bow, you're going to have it kind of in this X configuration with a larger gap on the top. When you're running them in a 3-fletch with most everybody's running a drop away of some sort, you need one vane sticking up on top and then a gap on bottom. Well, that vane sitting on top is going to limit the amount of distance that you can come from your arrow before you run into actual clearance issues with that top vane hitting. And you can do some funky things with rotating nocks and stuff, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have an issue. And it becomes unpredictable unless you've practiced that a lot. So I like a 4-fletch. It gives me more clearance at yardage. It also adds more surface area and more control, you know, when you are shooting broadheads. And you still can maintain that small diameter profile, you know, and I'm not picking on a boning blazer vane because I think it's one of the best hunting vanes, but this happens to be their stiffer version called the Black Sky, but it's a lot larger diameter there, and you're gonna have clearance issues a lot earlier with this vane configuration when you're trying to maximize distance like you are at an event like TAC. So just keep that in mind. You know, these are all 4-fletch options. I have 2 right here from AAE hybrid material. This is a hybrid 2.0, and this is a hybrid 23, and then this is an Air Razor Pro, the 1.7-inch vane, a little bit taller vane, but still where I have that 4-fletch configuration, it gives me a large gap on the top. So I'm an archery nut. I'm always playing with different arrow setups. These are 3 potential contenders. And we'll talk more about the shafts here in just a second. But you know, if you do run a 3-fletch, I would recommend a lower profile vane of some sort. And if all you're doing is strictly tack and you're not going to hunt with this, I mean, you can get away with a very small vane profile for just a fill tip like you would be running at tack. Let's talk shafts. So this year's been a really cool year with brands like Easton and Victory. They've got 2 really rad new arrows. I'm sure you've heard of them. The 5.0 high velocity from Easton, and then also the HLR from Victory. They're both happen to be a 5mm shaft. So we can talk about shaft diameter here in just a moment, but the big thing on these is they're a very light GPI, which is going to help you gain speed. And that's one of the main things that is going to help you achieve those longer yardages. So we already talked about the peep to pin distance, and then the speed is another large part of that. And then your peep height comes into play as well when we're talking about clearing distance. Now, peep height, if you're set on your anchor point and you're comfortable, you don't want to mess with that. So that really just comes down to the speed that you're going to be shooting an arrow at, and then also that peep to pin distance that we've already hit on. So as far as speed, I find that an arrow that's somewhere between like 5.3 grains per pound and 6 grains per pound is going to get you real close to where you can start, you know, clearing that 100+ yards depending on your pin configuration. So some of the shafts that are going to allow you to do that, we already talked about the Victory HLR and the Easton 5.0. If you like 4mm shafts, the Black Eagle X Impact is one of the lightest GPIs. Very good arrow, very good option. Have a gold tip airstrike, also a 5mm shaft, lighter GPI that's going to help you achieve that. You know, I have an Axis LR. It's a little heavier GPI, but depending on the IBO of your bow and your draw length, you may actually be able to clear this as well. And this is an Easton Sonic 6.0, another really light GPI shaft, a little bit larger diameter, but we can talk about point weight and how you can make this into a good tack arrow, even though it is a larger diameter shaft. So we've talked about diameter a lot. The big thing with arrow diameter is, yes, it performs better in wind if you go smaller diameter. But there is a catch there. The smaller the diameter, you are going to run into more critical tuning issues. It's just a smaller diameter for the energy of the bowstring to travel down. So keep that in mind. You know, it's not like it's a deal breaker. I shoot a ton of 4mm shafts, but I also am pretty on top of my tune at all times, and I watch it closely. So it does help you in the wind, as we talked about. But if you add point weight to any of these other shafts, you know, the point is what controls that arrow in a windy scenario. So the more point weight you add, you know, the more resistance it's going to have in the wind. So if you take away that point weight and the point starts to blow, the rest of the arrow is going to follow it. So adding point weight is going to help a lot. Now, there's a fine line there because, you know, you add too much point weight, you lose speed, and that's going to hurt you in the long run. So in a nutshell, I usually try to shoot for like 120 to 150 grains of total point weight up front on the given arrow. I have 150 grain glue in. This is a Victory 3D HV. It's the same as a Victory RIP XV for those of you that are familiar with their hunting shaft in this. So extremely light GPI, and I just did 150 grain glue in here. Total arrow weight on this is about 375 grains in a 300 spine, and I'm about a 28.5, 29-inch draw. I believe the arrow's cut about 27.5 there. So that is actually my top contender right now for a tack build. I should be shooting these somewhere around 310 foot a second, and it's going to allow me with this 2-pin UV housing that you see right here to clear 130 yards or so out of my current build right now. So I know that's a lot of information, but I hope it kind of helps you kind of wrap your head around what I'm looking for when I start to build a tack build. There's a lot of really cool calculators online. Gold Tip has a really nice arrow calculator that you can jump on, put the grains per inch of the shaft that you want to shoot, the front end components, the nocks, the vanes, all those things that start to add up to that total arrow weight. And then get yourself familiar with an IBO calculator. So that's obviously, you take the rating of the bow, you put your draw length in, you put any added weight like a peep sight, D-loop into that calculator, and it's going to give you an estimated speed that you're going to shoot a given arrow out of your setup. I know that was a lot there, but check them out. Just Google IBO calculator. There's a couple really good ones, and they're pretty self-explanatory how to use them. And if you have questions on that, once you jump into that and you're not sure how to use them or what you're exactly looking for, just call into us. We can easily kind of walk you through how to use those, how to select the right arrow for your given setup. But most of you guys that are shooting, you know, in that 65 to 70 pound range, you know, that's going to be somewhere around like 375 to 440 grains, let's say. And that's right in that 5.3 to 6 grains per pound that we talked about. So I know that's a lot of info, but I'm hoping that at least kind of sends you in the right direction on what you want to select for a build. Point weight with a lot of these arrows is not going to be an issue because they already have like a half out that's going to give you around 50 grains or so with a 100 grain tip. So you're going to have a lot of point weight with most of these right out of the package to build a really awesome arrow for the TAC events. So we'll jump into our whiteboard here and kind of show you what we're talking about on sight configuration. Here I have a whiteboard, dumb little pictures I've drawn here. I told you I'd give you a little bit more idea why pin configuration is so important on maximizing yardage. I wanted to talk kind of about 3 of the common pin configurations that people are using nowadays on their dial/slider sights. So obviously single pin, 3 pin, and 5 pin. And the big reason that this matters so much is the amount of negative space that you can have inside of your housing. So obviously on a single pin, you have one aiming reference point here, and you have all this negative space that isn't being used. And it's just basically from the distance of where your aiming reference point to the bottom of your housing, the smaller you can make that negative space, the more clearance you're going to see. So in a 40-yard version, obviously, I say a 40-yard, most guys are probably going to run a 20, 30, 40 setup here, but that gap decreases significantly. And if you really want to, you can actually sight in so that your bottom pin starts kind of more in this area and go up from there. I personally like to leave it up. I'm not the guy that builds a bow like specifically for TAC and I'm gonna hug that, that bottom pin right next to it. Mainly because if I want to gap shoot, maybe I have a 45-yard shot and I don't want to actually slide for that. I can, set it up just a little bit higher to where I would have, just a little bit of a gap in there to use. But everybody's different. Some guys like to run that pin right next to the bubble, and they just prefer to slide if they're using it past that. The 60-yard, a 5 pin, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. It seems like in the last couple of years, a lot of people are going back to fewer pins. So this is not as common now, but you can see it's got the smallest gap from an aiming reference point to the bottom of your housing, unless you go this route and you really run that pin as far down as possible. So a lot of times more pins is better in clearing more yardage as long as you're running them really close to your level down here. The 2 pin, which I showed you the UV housing, is really cool because you still get a lot of the sight picture benefits from that single pin, but you do have that bottom pin as a reference point that significantly cuts down that negative space that isn't being used. And it just allows you to have that clean sight picture and use that second pin to get that maximum yardage out of your setup. So I hope this helps a little bit. It's really just wrapping your head around it. Some people, they've made it really easy actually to switch housings out. So for instance, I showed you that UV housing. There's a very good chance I'm going to be running that 2 pin for TAC as long as I can clear the yardage that I need to, which given the arrow shafts and stuff, I should be able to do that no problem. And I just have that clean look. I'm able to run a sight light and get, if you're in those dark shadowed spots, you're going to be able to use that sight light and still get a lot of yardage and have that real clean sight picture. And then, hunting likely will be found either running that 20, 30, 40 pin or a 20 through 60 for my slider setup. So hopefully that helps, gives you a little bit of an idea what we're looking at when we're building these, longer range slider setups for TAC, or maybe you got an antelope hunt or something out west. I'm not necessarily promoting long range bow hunting, but if you already have an arrow and an animal and you need to be able to shoot distance, this is what's going to get you there. So I hope that helps. So I'm here in our arrow ID room. I wanted to talk about vane selection a little bit more in depth. I have some of our most popular vanes laid out here in front of me, and we talked about 3 fletch versus 4 fletch and what I would pick and choose. So here on the left side, these are going to be close to that 3-inch option. So this is like a 2.6-inch hybrid from AAE, 3-inch X vane from Boning, and then this is a 3-inch Griff X from Q2I. I would personally fletch these in a 3 fletch configuration. Slide off slit, slight helical. I wouldn't get too aggressive. It brings up a good point. I wouldn't fletch for an event like TAC with a really extensive helical or a real aggressive offset. You're just adding more drag to the back end of the arrow that doesn't necessarily need to be there and you're just gonna slow down and grow that pin gap as distance increases. Next to it here, this is a heat vane from Boning. Awesome vane, kind of an in-betweener on size. This guy happens to be 2.5 inches on the lower profile side of things. You could 4-fletch this if you wanted to, but a 3-fletch would be a great place to be on that without adding a lot of drag, but you will have that vane sticking up, so just keep that in mind. And then these options on this side, we've got a Q2Y X vane. This is a 2.1 inch vane, AAE Hybrid 2.0, and an AirRazor Pro 1.7. Those all in a 4-fletch configuration would be some of my top picks if I was building an arrow specifically for TAC. These are the arrows I had in the studio. You know, just a real slight left offset. My bow clocks an arrow to the left naturally. I choose to fletch to match that. These are a left offset on all of these arrows that are being shot out of that prime currently. So I hope this helps, you know, kind of wrap your head around a little bit more on what you're looking at when you're trying to select a vane. But I would say, you know, that 3-inch, I would look at, you know, a 3-fletch, left offset, left helical, very subtle if you prefer 3-fletch. I encourage you to try 4-fletch. A lot of folks that try it, once they try it, they don't go back. I think it's a really good place to be, especially with mechanical broadheads at extended distances. You're able to get away with less vane, less surface area, diameter, and still achieve the same thing. So jump on blackovis.com if you have any more questions. Call into our customer service line. All these vanes that you see here are available to purchase if you're doing your own build, or you can order them through our custom arrow shop.